Welcome. This is Prince George Up Close. I'm your host, Nathan Gita, and I'm joined today by Bill Phillips. Bill, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
It's so good to have you here. And one of the big things that, of course, comes up a lot these days is a question of news. And you've been involved with news for a long time.
Very long time. Over 30 years.
Over 30 years?
Over 30 years, yeah. I started in as a sports reporter in the Fernie Free Press and moved from there to the Kimberley Daily Bulletin and then to the Invermere Valley Echo, then the Williams Lake Tribune, then the Prince George Free Press, and that met its untimely demise a few years ago, and now I'm doing online news with the Prince George Daily News.
When you started out in news, what did writing a report or creating an article, what did that look like back then?
The reporting aspect of it hasn't changed. You report, you take notes, and you write up your story. I wrote on a typewriter, believe it or not. I think the first one I had was actually an electric typewriter. I may have moved to a manual at some point in time, but they were around. And the process then was you did your story and you took it over to the typesetter. Typesetter typed it in, and then they would print out what they called galleys of type, which was a newspaper column. It'd be a big long piece of paper with your copy on it written in newspaper column width, and then you would edit that again. Actually, when you typewrite it, when you did it on the typewriter, it would go to the editor, who then made edit marks like the squiggles, the red lines, and all those kind of things, and then it went to the typesetter, who would read all those things that the editor did.
And then it was cut.
And then put a big X in it.
Well, there you go. And it was cut and then glued.
Cut,
right?
And then glued to actual paste up sheets for the paper. Yes, it was cut and glued, and photos were glued on. And waxed on, actually. You had a wax machine, and it would go through and it would apply wax to the one side, and then waxed onto the paper. Yeah.
And so every single day that the daily was printed, and I mean this would have been in the days not just of 6 day days. Some of those would have been 7 day dailies, I'm sure.
Yeah. At that time, every newspaper, that's how it was done.
And so every single day was just an enormous project. What was the cutoff line for that then? What time of the afternoon did you have to have everything ready to go?
When I started at the Fernie Free Press, it was a weekly paper, so our cutoff was like 2:30, I think, the day before, and then we would print out the galleys. We'd rush down to the bus, throw them on the bus, send them to Nelson where they would be printed, and then trucked back to Fernie. So you had essentially a real firm deadline, because if you missed the bus, you had to drive, and whoever caused you to miss the bus, that's usually who had to drive and pick up the cost of getting it to the press. So
that's incredible. There's another aspect of things that people don't really think about, even if they do handle a pressed paper, is that these are really pressed, that they are produced by a machine. They have to be stacked, they have to be folded, and distributed. That aspect of news, of course, has changed quite a bit. Do you remember how many papers were printed at some of these dailies you were at before?
When I was at Kimberley, it was pretty small. I think our press run was somewhere around 3,000 a day. When I was in Williams Lake, the press run there was around 10,000 a day. And at the Free Press, our press run here was just under 30,000.
30?
30, yeah.
That is crazy. That is a lot of papers.
And those were all small papers. You think of something like the Vancouver Sun or the Province that are printing, they would be in probably the hundreds of thousands in a day.
Do those regional papers print regionally, or do they ship them from a central location every time?
Usually a central location, and Williams Lake was the press center for Black Press. It was Caribou Press when I was at it. So it printed papers from as far south as 100 Mile right up to Prince Rupert. So
Wow.
it was, it would, yeah, you'd ship.
And
the
they'd all
paper.
get shucked that night.
It all gets shucked that night, yeah.
That's crazy.
So stuff like when the print shorts free press first started, it was done before it was before electronics. So they had to do the bus thing as well. So they had to get it on the bus, ship it down here, and then it would be trucked back overnight, and the paper's there the next morning.
Well, speaking of buses, those don't run anymore.
Yeah,
either,
so
do they?
it's so it'd be kind of tough now.
Different industries going in different ways. What if we look at? Do you think that maybe the very way that news was literally constructed back then, like especially when it comes to a newspaper, has that changed? Maybe George Grant can be referenced here. Technology and justice. The fact that you can just press a button now for your news or making news or whatever, or liking or unliking or whatever, has that changed the way that we look at news?
Probably because it's so immediate now. It's like I said, when we were doing it and you're pasting it up and then you have to truck it down and truck it back, there's a long delay between when you go to press and when the final product shows up. And now that everything is online, it's like as soon as I've done the story, hit publish and there it is. And so the downside of that is that you quite often don't have oversight on what's being published. Editors, in newspapers, when there's a time delay, there's editors that look over things, that check for grammar, check for content, and they might ask the poor hapless reporter, where'd you get this story from? Like, did this guy really say this? And when you remove all that, then it's just kind of like, and away you go, and there's no accountability. So that's one of the downsides of where we are today, I guess, is there's not a lot of editing, of taking a second look at things.
What do editors do then if there's so much today? I mean, if there's so much content being generated so quickly, how can they parse it at all? Do they?
You do what you can. That's always the way it was, and you have to be quick, and you have to know what to look for and all that kind of stuff. When I was here, like when I was at the Free Press, we might do a 48-page paper. So it's incumbent on me to read and edit all of those stories as best I can.
In a day?
In a day, yeah. So, and something slips by, well, you get heck for it, and there's no defense for it really, because you're supposed to be catching all these things. So yeah. Mistakes do happen, yeah.
How fast must you guys be able to read, newspaper editors?
You get pretty quick, yeah.
Just, I can barely get through a page and remember what was at the top of it. Yeah. We live in an era where there's lots of terms being thrown around. People talk about bias. People talk about what is and isn't working in news. Of course, the big one is fake news. We'll be going into the break a moment here, but kind of quickly, do you think that term has any merit, and what, if it does it really define?
I don't know that it defines it. I've never liked the term. I think we're just seeing more fringe element stuff, I guess is what you might want to term it, because it's always been around. Like, I've been in the newspaper industry for 30 plus years, and we always had, for lack of a better term, the crazies would come out and send you stuff, and it's kind of like, and that's the thing, you'd have, as an editor, you kind of like, well, this isn't really for publication, or this, you can't say this because it's not really correct, it's not proper, and it's not properly sourced. And now when we turn into
this is slander, this is libel.
This is libel. And now when you get into the fake news generation or era, I guess it's a little different. And what's happened now, I think, is a lot of organizations, especially on the internet, is that they can create things that look and sound like they're legitimately sourced stories, and they come from a legitimate news outlet, and it's so hard to tell the difference. Yeah.
And there's I think there's kind of layers to that as well. Maybe just quickly here, could you give us an example of what wouldn't have been published before versus how it would probably get through today? Something that you maybe yourself saw in the past, something that was submitted. You don't have to give any specific details, but just something that was submitted that nowadays could very well end up somewhere curated, but back then every editor in town would have been like, no, that's not going to work.
Well, one of the most obvious things is blatant advertising, and we still get them today, and you still see them today. But what we would get is somebody, Joe's whatever company would send you, oh, here's a press release, and it's all about something. It's all about how to, properly groom your fingernails, and it's kind of like, oh, it's got lots of good information in it, and then in there somewhere is a mention of their product, right? And that's been around for a long time. And as an editor,
that's not news. That's advertising.
That's advertising.
They should pay for that.
So you would filter. Yeah, exactly. That's what you tell them. You pay for that. You filter that out. So that still goes on, but you see probably more of that getting in, because part of the problem is that the news workforce shrinks, but the news whole probably hasn't shrunk as much, and so editors are scrambling to fill that news hole. So you get something, oh, here's a story. Oh, how to do your fingernails. Sure, throw that in the lifestyle section, and you're not paying close enough attention, right? So it does slip by.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. That's very interesting. So let's talk a little bit more about that question of fake news, but also curation online and that sort of thing. You curate online, you publish online. What are the tools that you use to filter through what is right, what is accurate, and what is maybe fallacious, and what is clearly something from a crank? What makes the difference? What's the key?
For me, it's just my own judgment. It's the come from years of experience of doing it. That's really what I use, and I have the luxury of doing my own thing, so I can decide whatever I like, basically. And that's part of it. Is when they go back to the newspaper model, they all talk about freedom of the press. Of course, the joke is that freedom of the press belongs to whoever owns the press. Mm-hmm. So online, it's the same sort of thing. I can pick and choose what I want to republish or do a story on, and all that kind of stuff. So, and plus I try to look at what warrants further investigation or further, because a lot of times, even through fake news, there's a kernel of something in there that might be of interest. And if you can find out what that kernel is, and find out and try to extract the actual truth from it, there's probably a story there. So rather than simply take what you're given and say, oh, here it is, just kind of take it and then massage it and try to the whole thing in journalism. There's the old joke is that if your mother tells you that she loves you, get it corroborated. So that's part of it too. Just because you get something from somebody doesn't mean that it's true. It might not be. It might be true. It might not be. So that's the whole core of journalism, is find out whether it's actually true or not.
Right. I heard it through the grapevine.
I heard it through the grapevine. Yes.
Great song. Yeah. So there was something interesting that we were talking about just before the break, and one of the points you made was that something could look really professional and really really real, and that could also at the same time be just not true. It just could be totally false. And that's something that I find is a real issue nowadays, where something in form, and it even hits the right tone, but the actual content, once you read between the lines, it actually isn't news. It is even fake news, or it is color. It's not news. It's color.
Yeah.
It's definitely commentary being disguised as news. Has that always been an issue wherever we are, regardless of the time period?
Probably a little bit, but I think it's worse now because you can create. It's so easy to create something. I had an issue where it's on Facebook. I actually reported it. Nothing happened. Facebook said, "Oh, that's fine."
Thanks, Zuckerberg.
I saw a thing. I don't know if you knew about the story. Just quickly about Drake, who got kicked out of a casino, and all that. And that was actual news. And then I saw a thing and said, oh, Drake's fighting back or something. I said, okay, it's a slow day. So I click on it, brought me up to a site about Drake was opening up his new casino, his own casino, to fight this or something. And then
I think that's a joke somewhere. I'll go get my own casino with blank and blank.
Or he was going to support this other casino. And then I checked on it. It looked very much like a Vancouver Sun website, but it wasn't.
Ooh.
And every link on there took you to this casino that Drake was supposedly supporting. So I thought, that's a classic example of fake news. They hook you in, but it looks like a news story. When you brought it up, it read like a news story, except for it's all about this new casino. And all the links on it take you to that casino. I said, well, that's fake.
Advertising.
That's advertising. That's fake. And I suspect Drake wasn't even involved in it. So I reported on Facebook, and they sent me a message back, which I was surprised they actually did. And they said, oh, no, it meets our criteria. It's okay.
Oh, it's fine.
So, so how do you fight that? That's the other part of it, is how do you fight when the platform where a lot of this is on turns a blind eye?
Yeah, and that's an ongoing question, with a lot of different things. And, of course, these platforms, right, they're not being treated as utilities. They're getting to sit in between in that sweet spot. And we'll see how much longer that lasts, because they're kind of sucking up market share. With something that you brought up with me before we got on here, before we started taping. Yeah. Where does all that money go if I give it to Facebook for my advertising?
Goes to Mark Zuckerberg.
That's interesting.
Or whoever, right? It goes into the black hole that is Facebook, and that's one of the arguments for supporting local media, whether it's online or whether it's a newspaper or it's radio or a TV show. If you buy some advertising there, that money stays in the community. If you buy an ad promoting your event or buying your ads on Facebook or Google or Twitter, that money not only leaves the community, it leaves the country.
Yeah.
It's just gone.
Untaxed.
Right? Untaxed, well. Yes, it is untaxed. That's the other part of it. So that's one of the downsides, and that has had a real impact on media because it's so effective. Like newspapers are expensive.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what it is now, but if you paid full price for a full page ad in the Citizen, it'd be well over $2,000 now. So you're looking at that one day, big ad, $2,000. You can do a Facebook push on Facebook for $100, and you will probably get your ad in front of as many people as it will that $2,000 ad in the Citizen. So you can't really blame advertisers, because that's the tough part is that Facebook's so cheap and it is effective. But the problem is that money leaves the town, leaves the community, and your local businesses really end up suffering.
There seems to be a feedback loop as well, right? With how, for example, the bargain finder no longer exists. And I mean, the three things that everybody had somewhere in their community was the Bible, the almanac, and the bargain finder, and now there's no bargain finder.
Yeah.
And so the issue is that, that was a great place for people to get stuff done, and they would sell things to each other, and they'd do swaps and all sorts of stuff. I remember seeing tons of, retired guys that go right away. The first day it was published,
wait till it got
grab
on.
it, grab their pencil, sit down with a coffee, start circling trucks they could fix up, and then turning a profit. The inefficient market, as it were.
Yeah.
And so there's a feedback loop where that doesn't exist anymore. And so now Facebook's getting even more of that business, but that's probably the way that it died as well.
Yeah.
And it kind of becomes a spiral. How is there supposed to be, if you're going to do a physical publish, publish a physical object, a physical news item or whatever, paper or an advertising magazine or something, how are you supposed to fight back against that all-encompassing empire, whether it is the big tech companies or even just somebody doing something online by themselves, which is way cheaper than printing something?
Yeah. Well, it's tough. It's very tough because the costs are so high. When I was in Williams Lake, I think it was one of the last times they had an actual figure, and this is probably 20 years ago. The standard thing, and when they used to give tours, and that was the one of the lines that I would use that would surprise people, because they would ask, well, how come advertising is so much? I said, well, at that time it cost us $800 a page to produce the paper. So by the time you pay all the reporters, the ad people, you get you buy the ink, you rent the building, you know, the press and all that. That's how much it costs to produce the paper. So you have to charge accordingly, right? So it's not cheap, it's expensive to do. And so yeah, then along comes Facebook and social media and desktop publishing and you know what used to take a bunch of people, you know, back in the paste up days, you'd have production departments, which are usually at that time the largest department in the building was the production department, because they're doing all the paste
Scissors
up,
and glue
scissors and you know, knives, sharp knives, and like you cut your fingers all the time.
Oh dear.
And yeah, so there was very labor intensive, a lot of manpower. And now when desktop publishing came along, that was one of the first ones that all of a sudden you don't need all those people. Mm-hmm. You know, you can lay it on your computer and then print it out on one page and everything's done, right? So yeah. It's tough. And now with Facebook, yeah, you don't even need to print it out.
No, it's true. As we look at the future of news, I mean, for example, in this federal election, there's going to be some discussion about how there's going to be some subsidies given to the legacy papers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Some people have called that out as bias and buying the press, and some people have said, no, it's necessary to support it. Is that a sustainable model, and where are things going to end up?
No, I don't think so. I basically roll my eyes at the bailout to the newspapers when the newspapers got themselves into the mess. Nobody did it for them, but they were part and parcel to it. The newspapers were, I wouldn't say slow to adapt. They resisted change when the internet was coming. The newspapers across the land said, "We're in the newspaper business," and
not the blogging
yeah,
business.
there was a lot of pushback in the industry from actually changing. So I think a lot of it they brought on themselves. The federal government jumping in and bailing out, that's to me that's just ridiculous. Mainly because that money doesn't seem to be going to actually putting more journalists anywhere. It goes to helping companies like Post Media pay off their debts to U.S. hedge funds. That's where the money's going to go, supposedly, anyways. But you know, I just think it's ridiculous, and I don't think, you know, and it's been pegged as buying off the media. I don't know that they're going to buy off the media. It's like the media is going to do what the media is going to do. But I just think it was unnecessary. It's not going to change anything. The newspapers have a difficult business model now, and just throwing money on it doesn't change the business model. It just delays to when it actually will, you know, disintegrate, I suppose. Newspapers have to change how they do business. So.
No, that is the question of our era. Changing business strategies, changing career strategies,
Yeah.
changing education strategies for that matter. But we don't have time to get into that right now. Again, I want to thank you for coming on to the program. It's been good to have you here, Bill.
Well, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
It's been a pleasure.
And of course, you've been watching Prince George Up Close. I'm your host, Nathan Gita. Join us again next time for more conversations with people around Prince George.